Hello, I'm Kads, and welcome back to the Raid Starter Pack. So you're ready to take on the Dark Fae, probably the most popular, most farmed, and most enticing boss in the Doom Tower. In this video, we're going to be talking about what she does and how to avoid a lot of what she can do, talk about things that are strong against her, as well as showcase you two teams, one that's kind of more of your starter team to first get you going, and then of course I'll show you the team that I use to farm her fairly quickly. As usual, let me get my disclaimers out of the way that these teams are going to be tuned for stage 120 on hard mode, but of course you can scale back the stats appropriately depending on your level of progression. Any champion that I use will be in more of an endgame build because I am an endgame player, but don't let that dissuade you. The primary focus of this video is the strategy for beating the boss, and you can employ that and scale that appropriately to your level of progression. So the Dark Fae is a quite tricky boss in some respects. She's fairly simple once you kind of know the strategy and you've figured it out, or someone has told it to you, but if you're going in kind of cold, it can be a very rough fight. So let's start off with her passive ability, because it's probably one of the most important things you have to consider when you're constructing a team. So the Fae Mirror passive, it will place a perfect veil on her, meaning that she cannot be targeted at the beginning of the fight because she's going to spawn mirror copies of your entire team. That means they have all of your stats, all of your blessings, all of your artifacts and gear and accessories, but the one thing they do not have, I believe, is your aura, because she is the team lead, so to speak, of her own fight. Therefore, if you have a speed aura, you're going to be slightly faster than your mirror copies, but they have everything that you have, except that they don't have to worry about cooldown reductions and all that stuff, at least at the start of the fight. Their abilities are always going to be ready to go, so you're going to have to consider that when you get to the wave 3. So in essence, you need a plan to be able to have a composition that can either control your mirror copies or kill your mirror copies relatively quickly, and until you do so, unless you have all AoE attacks, you literally cannot attack the Dark Fae herself because she is under the perfect veil. She can redo that spawning of the mirror copies of your team after her dark energy counter reaches 5, but in most cases we'll talk about the dark energy counter, but she won't reach that, so you don't necessarily have to worry about that unless you have a ridiculously slow team, which we're going to try and avoid with the teams we're going to be showcasing today. So starting off with her abilities, we're going to go in the order in which she likes to use them, starting with the Dark Abduction, where she will banish one of your champion and spawn a mirror copy of them. This is just like the mirror copies that she spawns at the beginning of the fight, except that it's just one champion, and she'll typically target the person with the highest amount of crit damage on the team, i.e. the person who's most likely to kill your team and the person who you might struggle to free if you only have one DPS on your team, for example. This is the ability that will increase her dark energy counter by 1, so every time she uses this, or if she uses this 5 times, then she'll respawn an entire mirror copy of your entire team. Dark Abduction will also place True Fear on your entire team for 1 turn, so keep that in mind. If she does get her first turn, you might miss your turn due to the True Fear. On the other abilities, it kind of depends on the makeup of your team, what she's going to try and do, but she could go for the A3 here, attacks all enemies, and then everyone will join in on the attack on her team. Typically, she'll only do this if she has some banished allies and or mirror copies to attack you with. Otherwise, it's just, it doesn't really do much because it's just an ally attack by herself, meaning she could probably just use one of her other abilities. Dark Tendrils is the one you kind of have to worry about a little bit. It does a lot of things, and there's a lot of text here, but we'll try to break it down a little bit. So she can steal buffs according to the number of magic champions on your team. She can steal turn meter if there's according to the number of force champions on the team. She can place True Fear depending on the number of void champions on the team, and she can heal herself by 10% for each spirit enemy on the team, or spirit champion on your team. So you can try and min max and consider this and whatnot, but all that really matters, because everything else is kind of irrelevant. Magic champions can be kind of painful if she starts stealing buffs, but you may or may not have that many buffs that this might not even be a concern. And then True Fear, of course, is always annoying because you might miss your abilities, but the healing is kind of negligible, and the turn meter is also kind of negligible. And then lastly, on the A1 AoE attack here, where she can place a leech, so she can heal herself a tiny bit, but the damage she does to you is so negligible compared to her health pool, so you don't really have to worry about having leech on your team. So let's take a look at the starter team for Dark Fae, and we have a pretty simple composition in terms of the makeup. One thing to keep in mind is that you typically do want your team to be relatively squishy so that they're easier to deal with, easier to kill. So you don't want a bunch of stone skin, you don't want a bunch of reaction, you don't want your tankiest reviver right on the enemy team, because it's just going to be that much harder for you to kill your mirror copies. And for a team such as this, you can see we're indexing very, very hard into turn meter suppression, meaning that we're trying to minimize the amount of turns that the Dark Fae takes. And ideally, she never ever takes a turn at all, so we don't have to worry about any of her abilities. Now, unlike the Scarab King, turn meter effects against her are reduced by 50%, just like a lot of more of the endgame bosses. And so you do have to account for that with a lot more turn meter suppression in order to prevent her from ever taking a turn. So in this composition, we have Deacon in the lead. Again, speed aura works on your team, but the enemy team is using her aura, which is none. So you're going to be a little bit faster just based on that. But Deacon is really good because he has turn meter pushback as well as turn meter fill. So he's keeping you ahead of your mirror copies as well as ahead of the Dark Fae. Leech on the A1 is handy for the healing. And then, of course, the AoE decrease defense allows you to do the most amount of damage to your mirror copies. And then we have a trifecta of turn meter suppression. Allure comes in once again with their A1, the best single target turn meter suppression ability in the entirety of the game. We have Cold Heart in here. Heartseeker is really strong. Enemy max HP hit, but also reduces turn meter. And we have Royal Guard in the mix as well. He has turn meter suppression on his A3 with decreased speed, which is quite important to bring into this fight. You do want to slow her down. It makes it a lot easier to control her turn meter, on top of having a backup decreased defense on the A1 and then an enemy max HP hit AoE as well. The last slot here is the flexible spot. Obviously, most of you will not have White King Narcisse, and so this could just be any nuker on your account. A nuker who ideally is the positive affinity or neutral affinity relative to your makeup. You don't want a weak hit, but this is just a placeholder because Narcisse happens to be around the right speed that you would need for your nuker to go before or like within all of the other champions here. We don't want them, again, taking a bunch of turns, your mirror copies, and doing things to you that you were going to do to them. So again, you don't have to use White King Narcisse. This could be any nuker. Could be your arena nuker, someone you have built in Savage, or someone who can just deal a lot of damage quickly to your mirror copies. So let's go ahead and see this team in action and have a little bit of a chat about AI overrides. When it comes to Deacon Armstrong, I do have him open or don't use on the AoE decrease defense, just so he has it ready to go once we get to the Dark Fae. And I'm permanently disallowing him from using the turn meter suppression, just because depending on how quickly you kill the waves, that will vary greatly depending on your team composition. But we want him to have his turn meter control ability ready to go once we get to the Dark Fae. We don't want it on cooldown, because then you're introducing a little bit of RNG or chances that the enemy team might go first and then wipe you because your team is designed to wipe their team or the mirror copies of your team. So it's going to be a little bit slower on the waves because of this fact, but nonetheless, it is worth it just to make sure that we have, relatively high rate of success when we get to the boss phase. So 40 seconds to get through the waves, and here we are, we're ready. We start with turn meter suppression. We place decrease defense on most everyone. We nuke them down, and from there, we start to turn meter control the rest, or the Dark Fae herself. So Evil Eye, of course, as a mastery, definitely helps with this fight as far as getting, breaking up a little bit in between everyone's turn meter suppression abilities, but Deacon, of course, really short cooldowns, relatively speaking, and so he can maintain his position as far as staying ahead of the Dark Fae. We have, you can see, a Relentless set on Allure. We're going to go over the builds on these champions a little bit later, so that can definitely help keep her turn meter suppressed. But aside from that, we're basically just waiting for us to do our thing and keep her turn meter suppressed. You can see there she's permanently under the veil. That will never go away because we have no way to strip it off in this particular composition, and so we're just keeping her turn meter at bay. And again, ideally, she never ever takes a turn at all whatsoever. So none of her abilities ideally should be used for this type of composition. And one thing to consider, though, if you are worried about true fears, then you can use an Inquisitor Shamail on your team, and he will make you immune from true fears, especially if you have a lot of void champions, particularly on your squad, so that can help with that. But that's a slot that you're forfeiting for either a nuker or turn meter suppression, so you're kind of conceding a little bit there just to protect yourself from missing turns from the true fear. But it can be very deadly to get true feared out, because if she banishes someone at the wrong time and then your entire team has true fear proc, the DPS that she stole might kill your entire team depending on your composition. And we might actually see a little bit of that happen when you use my real team here in a few seconds here. But yeah, pretty quick fight overall, 2.5 minutes or so, even with mostly epics. And again, a filler slot for any nuker. It doesn't have to be a White King Narcisse. This could just be anyone who is speed tuned enough to go after Deacon, but ideally before everyone else on the team, just to make sure that the floor or the stage is clean. And you can definitely take advantage of the mastery. We'll see his masteries a bit later. Whirlwind of Death will give you more speed when you get killed. So even though my Narcisse on paper is slower than my 3 turn meter suppression suppression champions, he goes faster, or he goes before them because of the kills he secures during the waves. So now let's take a look at the team that I use to farm, and this is the team that gets me more of the 90-second clear time. So we're swapping a couple of the champions, but a couple of them are the exact same. So we have Allure still in the mix, we have the same Coldheart in the mix, we have Whisper joining the fray because she is super fun to use against this boss, and then we have Yakarl, who you can get for free from the clan shop, and he's uniquely suited for this fight, and he could do a couple of things for your team depending on how you want to use him and how you want to build him. He could be your starting champion, at least going for against the mirror copies, because he can freeze them, which is a good form of control, and then he can come back around eventually to spam his A2 on the boss, which is a turn meter steal, so he can steal the turn meter from her, he gains it, and he also places your decreased speed. So he's kind of taken the position of the Royal Guard a little bit in this squad. And then we're bringing in Herndig, a former fusion, but he's uniquely kitted in that he can grant extra turns on his A1, which can reset the cooldown of his A3. So effectively, no matter where he is in his turn order with his abilities on the waves, as long as he can get a kill on the A1, he can always unlock his A3, which is effectively an AoE, and so he can kill all the mirror copies. So he's doing like 3 jobs at once, really. Good wave DPS, he is our mirror copy killer, and then he also has some turn meter suppression on his A3 that he can use against the Dark Fae. So we have turn meter suppression with Allure and Coldheart, turn meter suppression with Yakarl, and turn meter suppression with Herndig. So we have quadruple, and then we have the hard DPS of Whisper in the mix. So let's go ahead and see this team in action as well. In terms of the AI overrides, because of the Herndig factor, we have to worry a lot less about being efficient, so to speak, with our turns, but I do make sure that he uses only his A3 on wave 1, and then he's allowed to use the AoE decrease defense on wave 2, just because we want to speed up the waves as much as possible. Unfortunately, wave 2 is all force, and we have magic and void squad here. But yeah, so we can essentially allow him to do whatever he wants, more or less, along the waves, because we can come here and he is the fastest on the squad. He gets a kill on the Allure, and then he goes in with the AoE and kills all the other mirror copies. And from then on, we can start with the real fight in terms of starting with the turn meter suppression. So there's a little bit of a delay here. I have Coldheart save her Heartseeker because I want my turn meter suppression to be kind of staggered and not just stacked all at once, back to back to back. And so you'll see that we have a delay there, and now we go in for the Heartseeker, and then from then her and Yakarl will be 1 turn separated, and then eventually we'll work our way back around to getting the turn meter suppression back from Herndig, and from then on the Dark Fae basically will never ever take a turn. And I guess Whisper decided to turn up and go. Okay, she's gonna end the fight almost. But yeah, obviously Whisper is in Relentless there, so she can definitely pop off like that, and that's part of why she's in the team, because when she does that, she can do a lot of damage very quickly and end the fight very quickly. So I don't know who's going to get the final blow. I think Whisper's going to get it, but Herndig should have his turn meter suppression back. Oh, he steals it. He stole the victory. But yeah, so essentially that's how the team works. So we have a lot of turn meter suppression, lots of cooldown reduction, relentless sets going on in this set. Again, this is a more end game team for sure, so I can take advantage of those facts. And this is the exact team that I run to farm all of the lethal gear that I try and acquire. Now, this Whisper slot did used to be Royal Guard, as we saw in the more budget friendly team, just because he was an additional turn meter suppression champion. So we had 5 turn meter suppressions on the squad just to really make sure that the Dark Fae never got a turn. But since enemy max HP hits are capped, i.e. Coldheart can only deal a certain amount of damage, Whisper kind of out damages her by a good margin with her ignoring all defense A2 and providing her own increased attack. And so I kind of traded off a little bit of security for the higher damage output, meaning that we just kill her quickly enough in most cases that it doesn't really matter if we miss a turn meter suppression ability here and there. But we didn't get the bad RNG run, but every once in a while we get 3% resists and whatnot, and she banishes. I believe she targets Whisper because she does have the highest crit damage, and then usually Herndig or Yakarl can basically kill her copy and then continue on with the fight. Ideally Herndig, because he resets his abilities and he just goes straight back into the A3, but I digress. So yeah, that is the end game team. Let's go ahead and take a look at the builds on these champions, starting off with the more accessible team. We have Deacon Armstrong, who's kind of just in like an arena build, speed with some feral. Ideally, I guess I'd put him in like a 4-piece feral set for the block debuffs, but that's not really that imperative, and that is definitely more of an end game luxury. So total stats are as follows: 67,000 on the HP, 3,600 on the defense, 292 on the speed, so very fast. Again, he's more of like an arena flex champion backup speed. 500 on the accuracy, which is definitely overkill. In order to control the Dark Phase turn meter, you only need around 350, so just keep that in mind. For normal mode, you need around 250. For the blessing, I opted for cruelty. This is kind of my default for any champion who places AoE decreased defense. It just helps them do their job even better. And then for the masteries, this is more PvE focused. So offense tree is pretty standard debuffer stuff. Left hand side of the offense tree all the way down to War Master, and the support tree pretty much hugging the entirety of the right hand side, ending on Sniper and Master Hexer. Next up, we have Royal Guard, who is in Savage, but he used to be in Reflex when he was on this team. Again, cooldown reduction helps you get back to your turn meter suppression abilities a lot sooner, which can be a little bit more reliable in controlling her turn meter. Total stats are as follows: 41,000 on the HP, 4,800 on the attack, 204 on the speed. So this again is quite slow, but he's not in the build he used to be in when I used to use him on the Dark Fate team. Full crit rate, 243 on the crit damage and 365 on the accuracy, which is again more where you should be targeting if you want to control her turn meter on stage 120 of hard. For the blessing, crushing ground, of course, ideally this would be 6-star. Beggars can't be choosers, but eventually, hopefully, he gets to 6-star and he can actually take full effect, or take it full advantage of that fact. And then for the offense tree, I kind of have him built more for like dungeon farming, like old school build. I haven't changed him in years, but first hit on the takedown is kind of what's being prioritized. So he's kind of like a mix of nuking, and then we're ending on flawless execution for more crit damage because of course he's enemy max HP. And the support tree kind of zigzagging along, getting some extra accuracy stuff, lower still for the stats, and then sniper to increase the chances of the decreased defense on the A1. Next up, we have my arena build for White King Narcisse, which again, to reiterate, is just something any nuker can work in this slot. Ideally someone who's positive or neutral affinity relative to whoever you have on your team. He is in a lethal set with just one piece of stone skin for the extra HP. Total stats are as follows: 98,000 on the HP, 3,200 on the defense, 242 on the speed. And again, you'll note that he is slower than some of the other champions we're going to go on, but we'll see the mastery in a little bit. Full crit rate, 331 on the crit damage, and then we don't really care about his accuracy or his resistance. For the blessing for arena, I just have him in Ward of the Following. It just helps him be a little bit more tanky, so he's less likely to get one shot. But working on the 6-star, probably a couple months away from farming that, thanks to the Iron Twins. And then for the masteries, as you'd expect, just built to the nines like a nuker. So a lot of the nuking stuff here in the center. Where this is the mastery I was referring to that gives you more speed. So he one-shots the wave 1, which gives him 18 more speed. So he's really running by the time we get to wave 3 at like 260 or something. And so Deacon, and then thus he goes second after Deacon goes at 292 speed. And of course, we're ending on Helm Smasher to ignore as much defense as possible. Defense tree, we don't really care about accuracy and whatnot, so just a little bit of toughness, and then of course Retribution for the counterattacks, because he can definitely start popping off some of the squishier people, especially if Ward of the Fallen saves his life. Next up, we have Cold Heart, my utility Cold Heart, as I like to call her, in a reflex set with perception, and notably with one refresh accessory. So every once in a while she gets a double back-to-back Heartseeker, which is pretty cool to see, but I digress. Total stats: 41,000 on the HP, 3,200 on the attack, 252 on the speed, 70% on the crit rate, because that's all you need to maximize the potential of her A3, the Heartseeker, 246 on the crit damage, and 367 on the accuracy. Again, that's around where you would need it for stage 120 of hard. For the blessing, I went with Phantom Touch on her because she is tuned for the Dark Fae fight at this point in terms of her stats. And so Phantom Touch is just more chances for more damage every time she uses her quad hitter on the A1. So pretty much guaranteed to proc every time she uses her A1 with her level of blessing. I think 5-star would basically guarantee that it would proc at least once every A1, so just more damage, a little bit faster of a fight. And then for the masteries here, kind of like Royal Guard a little bit, but less focused on the initial hit, just because she doesn't always start off with the Heartseeker depending on the composition, but hugging the left hand side, but also making sure to come all the way back over to Floss Execution for the maximum amount of crit damage. This is more optimized for like challenge tournaments and stuff, where I go back to stage 20 and whatnot, where you don't have the enemy max HP cap, but there could be an argument made to switch her over to Giant Slayer, just because most of the time she is going to be used in endgame content, unless she is going to be hitting the enemy max HP cap. Then the support tree, we're zigzagging our way through all of the accuracy boosting stuff. I mentioned Evil Eye is really useful against the Dark Fae, just because you're using your A1s at the start, or you're going to use your A1s eventually, which will help you get going with the turn rate suppression. And then Sniper increases the chances of landing the hero reduction, I believe, on the A1, which could be useful if I had Spirit, or I guess a Deacon is Spirit Affinity champion, but if she did get a turn, she tries to heal herself, you have hero reduction on the fight, so that could be useful as well. Next up, we have Allure, the Queen of Single Target Turn Meter Suppression, in a Relentless set with Perception, and she does have a Blood Shield accessory, as you may have seen if you watched the Scarab King video. So total stats here: 40,000 on the HP, 3,600 on the attack, 2,400 on the defense, 251 on the speed, full crit rate 187 on the crit damage, so a little bit there, and then 411 on the accuracy. This is again a bit overkill. 350 is all you would need, but nonetheless it is more than enough to get the job done. For the blessing, I opted for cruelty on her just because even though she does have AoE decreased defense, a weak version on the A2, but because she does so many attacks on a single target, cruelty stacks up very, very quickly, and so it's just useful to get that extra damage out of the gate. So masteries here, we have our standard crescent moon where we start on the left hand side but bank all the way back over to the right hand side because she has a triple hitter on the A1 for Giant Slayer. And then for the support tree, once again kind of doing the zigzag thing with the accuracy stuff, Evil Eye once again, Lower Steel for the stats, and then Sniper to increase the chances of her A2 to place the weak version of decreased defense. Next up we have my amazing Whisper in her lovely Relentless set with some Cruel as well as one piece of Merciless. I am slowly but surely working towards getting her in like a 9-piece Merciless set, but that's probably going to take a long time, but I digress. So 43,000 on the HP, 7,000 on the attack, 267 or 2600 excuse me on the defense, 255 on the speed. I did recently rebuild her and she's a lot faster than she used to be. 70% on the crit rate, kind of like Cold Heart. She brings her own increased crit rate, so you don't have to worry about building her to 100% because she's always going to use her A2 to give herself that buff. 286 on the crit damage, and then we don't really care about her accuracy in this fight because all the debuffs are provided by the other champions on the squad. And for anyone wondering, we are fully utilizing her kit because Herndig does uniquely bring decreased defense and weaken, albeit not on the exact same ability. For the blessing, I opted for Phantom Touch. Ideally, this would be 6-star. Eventually, Crushing Rend would just be better for the damage on her A1 and her A3. But in the meantime, because we're not at 6-star, Phantom Touch is just more extra damage, and she is built with a lot of attack, so we do get a decent chunk of damage from that. And then for the Mastery, she is built as a boss killer for sure. So offense tree, we don't really need the crit rate on her. It's fairly easy to get her to 70%, so we actually went with the extra attack, notably on that one. But hugging majority of the left-hand side, Cycle of Violence can be nice for some encounters where she actually does hit a lot harder and can reduce the cooldowns of her own abilities. But of course, we're ending on War Master because she is a boss killing machine. And the defense tree, a little bit of the tankiness stuff, and Retribution can also come in clutch for extra damage on her A1. Next up, we have Yakar the Scourge, the Clan Shop champion, who is so good for this fight. He is also in a reflex set with Perception and then the one piece of Pharaoh for the extra accuracy. So his stats are as follows: 41,000 on the HP, nearly 5,000 on the attack, 215 on the speed. So quite slow, but that's just a limitation of my reflex gear at the moment, although I am hoping to rebuild him into 4 pieces of Merciless sometime in the future to get more attack, more crit damage, and a little bit more speed while maintaining the cooldown reduction effects. 100% on the crit rate, 223 on the crit damage, and then 411 on the accuracy. Again, a little bit high, but it's still more than enough to do the job. For the blessings, I opted for Brimstone because I basically only use him in the Dark Fae, and so if she does happen to get a turn, most of the time it's going to be after multiple uses of everyone else's abilities, and so she can just get a free Brimstone proc or for free damage for us whenever she does take her turn, whenever she uses her active ability. And then for the masteries, again, kind of tuned specifically for PvE content for this fight in particular, we have a fairly unique path, reverse crescent moon if you want to call it, but we start on the left hand side. We definitely want the Whirlwind of Death to speed him up a little bit because he is relatively slow, Cycle of Violence, and we're banking all the way back to War Master. So a little bit different in terms of the masteries you might typically see. And then on the support tree, same thing, zigzagging through the accuracy boosting stuff. Again, notably we want Evil Eye and then Lower Steel for the extra stats. Doesn't really matter about the other T5 just because Master Hexer is pointless in this fight. She's meant to not get a turn, so having a 3-turn versus a 2-turn decrease speed is irrelevant because most of the time she's never getting a turn at all, or maybe she gets 1 turn, so he's replacing it so many times it doesn't really matter to have it be longer duration. And then lastly, we have the star of the show, or one of the stars of the show, I should say, Herndig, the mirror copy killer, one of the best champions in the entire game for this particular fight. And he is in a Savage and Perception set. He stole a lot of my old Rotos gear when he upgraded to Merciless, but I digress. Total stats here: 44,000 on the HP, 5,600 on the attack, 2,600 on the defense, 253 on the speed, full crit rate 279 on the crit damage, and 378 on the accuracy. So for him, for the blessing, I opted for Crushing Rend as well. Ideally, once again, this would be 6-star to really maximize the amount of ignore defense he could do in any area of the game. But for now, 4-star, at least for the crit damage, was enough. And Crushing Rend is decent enough, at least, it guarantees that he'll kill Allure when he uses his A1 to reset the cooldown so he can use the AoE attack. And then for the mastery, it's kind of a mix of I guess it's arena style, but he's more of like a wave DPS, so think of it that way. But identical to Royal Guard, except that we're coming down to Helm Smasher to ignore as much defense as possible, which synergizes well, of course, with the Savage set. And the supports where you want, some of the accuracy boosting stuff, but mostly kind of turn meter focused on him, just because I knew I could get the accuracy requirements. But Lower Steel, once again, Evil Eye, once again, and then Master Hexer to extend his debuffs, because extending those actually can help. And just in case, she takes a couple of turns and runs off a decreased defense and whatnot. So there you have it. That's going to do it for this Raid Starter Pack episode on the Dark Fae. Hopefully you did find this guide helpful and you were able to beat her for the first time. Let me know about that in the comment section down below. If you stayed here till the end, I will want to offer you guys a bonus tip that you should be careful when it comes to Faction Guardians for epics as well as empowerment for epics, because one of the problems I had with my team was that, I empowered my Whisper because I wanted her to hit harder, more crit damage, more attack, etc., better stats. But she also got a lot of extra HP and defense, which made it a lot harder to kill her with my Herndig build at the time. And so since then, I've improved my Herndig to try and compensate for that. But just keep that in mind. If you start empowering your epics that are on these squads, they're going to be a lot tankier, which goes against the whole idea that we want our team to be relatively squishy so that we can kill them as far as the mirror copies are concerned. But you also don't want to be too squishy such that, if the Dark Fight gets one turn, she one-shots your entire team, right? You don't want that to happen either. So just keep that in mind. Keep that in balance. And so yeah, hopefully you did find these tips helpful. As always, if you did enjoy this video, then be sure to hit that like button down below. It really does help out the channel, and feel free to hit that subscribe button down below as well if you're enjoying the content overall on the channel. Thanks for watching and have a good one.